Good morning, everybody. We are going to start the Finance Committee. Today is November 15th and it is 8:03 a.m. Our first agenda topic is a presentation of our 2023-24 audit. We have Ron Miniger here from our auditing firm. I'm going to share my screen, Ron, so I'll share the information that you provided. Again, I sent an email to everybody with this information. I will also, at the conclusion of Ron's presentation, I will kind of go through some of the items that you're going to see to give you some more clarity and information on some of the audit things that or things that we experienced during the 2023-24 audit. All right, Ron, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, give me 1 second and here we go. Can everybody see that? I know it's little, a lot of numbers.
Right, that's where we'll start, table of contents.
Okay, go
All
ahead.
right, so what I like to do up front is to familiarize everyone with the structure of these financial statements, how they're arranged. So the financial statements themselves consist of 6 parts. One is management's discussion and analysis on pages 4 to 12. That's not yet completed. We are just wrapping up the audit, so that will be the next step for management to prepare that executive summary. Next, the second part are the fund financial statements, jumping down just a few lines. They can be found on pages 15 to 24. The governmental funds are presented on what's called a modified accrual basis, which means only cash and short-term receivables and short-term payables are included. Just above that, we have the government-wide financial statements on pages 13 and 14. Those figures on those statements begin with the balances from the fund statements and then add long-term assets such as capital assets and long-term liabilities such as bonds payable, the net pension liability, and net OPEB liability. These government-wide financial statements are on a full accrual basis, similar to how businesses present their financial statements. Next, we have the notes on pages 25 to 55. The notes provide details to support the numbers that are shown in the financial statements themselves. Fifth, we have required supplementary information regarding the state pension and other post-employment benefits, that's OPEB, on pages 56 through 60. And lastly is the single audit section. That's a report on the district's compliance with federal programs, major programs. That is not yet completed, so I haven't included that section in these financial statements. That will be completed shortly. So the audit itself consists of 3 components. One is an audit on the financial statements. If you look at pages, I may not have included that actually, on pages 1 to 3 in the full financial statements, we give an unmodified, which means a clean opinion. That means that the financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. The second report we issue is a report on internal control and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements. That can be found on pages 61 to 62, all the way in the back of the financial statements. There were no financial statement findings this year. And then the third report that we will issue is the report on the single audit applied to the school's major federal programs. So getting into the detail, if we start on the budgetary comparison statement, which is page 19, up on your screen now, you can see on the right-hand column, a few lines down, that total revenues came in $2 million higher than budget, so it's a favorable variance. A large part of that is earnings on investments, $1.8 million. Also, earned income taxes were $237,000 higher than budgeted. State revenues were 527,000 higher than budgeted, but one item that was lower is real estate taxes at 616,000 below budget. Towards working your way down the bottom, looking at total expenditures, we can see that that is 2.6 million over budget. That's about 3.7% of the total. And as you can see on that right-hand column, there is no one particular area in which you're over budget. I mean, you can look at student transportation, you can look at operation and maintenance of plant services. Now, going down a little bit towards the bottom, you'll see special items losses. That $1.4 million represents some write-offs of amounts that were due from the city of Philadelphia regarding the Carson Valley arrangement for students. So this year's loss of 1.4 million is in addition to the last year's loss of 1.3 million. At the very bottom, you can see the net change in the fund balance is $1.9 million lower than expected, primarily because of the Carson Valley, Philadelphia write-offs. And at the very bottom, you can see that the district ends with a general fund balance of $20.6 million. So moving on to the next page is the statement of revenues and expenditures. That second column, special revenue fund, just a side note, that represents student activity accounts for which the district has administrative control. And that includes all activity accounts except for the high school accounts, which are reported as fiduciary funds. We've already covered the first column, the general fund. So looking at the capital projects or the bond fund, you can see that current year expenditures total $3.6 million. Towards the bottom, other financing sources and uses includes $9.8 million in bonds issued, which leaves the district an ending fund balance in that fund of $16.7 million. The next column, the capital reserve fund, current year expenditures total $743,000, and you have an ending fund balance of $286,000. So the next page is the balance sheet for the governmental funds. So speaking to the $20.6 million fund balance of the general fund, that consists of cash and investments totaling $24.6 million. Then you add other current assets and subtract other current liabilities. So that's equating fund balance to the actual cash that you have. Now, listing of fund balance assignments and commitments that are shown at the bottom of that page are detailed in note 11 on page 53, and I've included that as a page as well at the very bottom. Now, you will see one thing I should mention, if you see that highlight on the top, that number that is highlighted, there's a few items that we still need, and one is the actuarial valuation for the district's other post-employment benefits plan. So that's why I had that highlighted. That number will change somewhat, but not materially, I don't expect. So again, those fund balances, the components are shown right there. And I just realized the middle column I need to expand a little bit. Sorry about that, guys. But obviously that total is $16,715,000. One other thing I'll note, these statements have not yet been proofed or subjected to our internal technical review. That will be done when the single audit is completed and the MD&A is completed. So the next page is the statement of net position. This is the government-wide financial statement, which is presented on a full accrual basis. Those figures reported here begin with the balances from the balance sheet for the governmental funds on page 15, and we add long-term assets and long-term liabilities. The largest liability towards the bottom of that page is the net pension liability at $87 million. That's up a little bit from the prior year's total of $86 million. We also have bonds payable of $111,000. You'll see that's an odd number because it not only includes the face amount of bonds outstanding, but also unamortized premiums and discounts on those bonds. And the other post-employment benefits is sitting at $3.7 million. So the fact that the district share of the total statewide PSERS liability is so high, that creates a deficit financial position of $50.8 million. And I know management addresses that fact in the MD&A, which is management's discussion and analysis. So the following page is the Food Service Fund Statement of Revenues and Expenses. The operating revenue of $565,000 is very much in line with the prior year. Operating expenses of $1,083,000 is up just a little bit. Federal and state food subsidies total $498,000. And you had a change in that position of a minus $16,000. You end with a fund balance of $199,000 at the bottom. So turning the page to the balance sheet for the food service fund. And again, that fund balance of $199,000 is comprised of $130,000 in cash, $95,000 of fixed assets or capital assets. And part of the fund balance is attributable to the fixed assets, so we carved that out at the bottom, leaving unrestricted net assets of $103,000. Are there any questions on the financial statements themselves?
None from me.
Okay.
None at this time. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, there's a few items that are still open. We will need a legal letter from the solicitor that's been requested. We need the actuarial report for the district's other post-employment benefit plan. When you look at the financial statements, the entire package that I had sent beyond just this presentation, you will see yellow highlighted text in note 8 and that one highlighted number in note 10 that I already showed you. And that's just to signify to me and anyone looking at that those sections need to be updated for that OPEB plan. We will be conducting the single audit shortly. Management will be preparing the MD&A, management's discussion and analysis. And again, the financial statements will be proofed and reviewed. And then once the audit is finalized, and all this will happen shortly, our intent is to have this done by the December 3rd board meeting. So once the audit is finalized, we will also issue a report. It's a standard report called a SAS 114 report that we issue every year. And it's a summary of all the accounting principles used by the district, any significant estimates that are included in the financial statements, highlighting any important financial statement disclosures, significant audit adjustments, and any other findings or issues that we would have had. Again, no issues with the financial statement audit, and we have yet to conduct a single audit. And that's about all I have.
Thank you, Ron. Again, as always, thank you for the work that you've done on this. We'll have this wrapped up and have our report for the December 3rd meeting, which is when the board will approve it. We anticipate that there will be no material changes from the numbers that you see, the Finance Committee is seeing right here. It's just the back end things on the change in OPEB, which is minor. It's not significant numbers. If it was, we would, obviously come back and report that. But we don't anticipate that. It's just all the procedural things to wrap up to get us into the final piece of the audit, the final issuance of the audit. I also want to thank Sam because she leads the audit and she was for the majority of the second half of the year last year, she was on maternity leave. So she came back 2 weeks before the audit started. I also want to thank my team and Liz Vogelbacher because Liz took up the lion's share of making sure that Sam was up to date on all of her things so that when she came back, she didn't have a lion's share of things to do. So I think working as a team and having Sam out for a bulk of, the second half of last year and getting the audit turned around with no findings and a clean audit, I think is great. So thank you very much for all your work. As I've always said in every meeting that I'm in, I am very happy to have you back, Sam.
I'd also like to thank Karen, Sam, and the staff. Very responsive during the audit, and the audit is a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ron, very much. I won't, you don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting. We're going to talk about budget. So for next year, but thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
Thanks, Ron. Take care.
Thanks, Ron.
All right, so I'm going to get into our agenda and I am going to go through some of those numbers may look daunting to you guys. That's not really Ron's thing to dig down into why the variances are happening. So I want to go through a couple of things because like I said, we anticipate what we're going to use in fund balance. We've talked about Carson Valley. So I want to kind of get into a couple of those things, which I think will answer some questions that may be popping up in your head on why there's swings and why there's variances, okay? Give me 1 second. Gotta find my. Give me 1 second, please. Can you see that?
Indeed.
Okay. So we're going to get to the discussion on the audit. So as you heard Ron say, the big numbers that we're looking at, and for the student representative, welcome back. This is a super stimulating presentation of this time of the year. So we are required to go through an annual audit every year that they go through our books. They look at our different funds. The main fund is the general fund. That's the one that has the primary interest. The other funds are specialized funds that are for specific reasons, like the capital projects funds. That's when we issue a bond. So that holds the bond money and makes the payments for special projects that get identified by a bond. Just to give you a quick, you know, understanding of what he was talking about, because those numbers can be a lot. But the general fund is the one thing that we are really interested in, we want to look at, because that is the budget that gets presented every year to the board and the board approves. That is the operations of our district and what pays for everything. So looking at our 2023-24 audit, you heard Ron talk about our revenue was over. There was a variance of about 2 million from what we budgeted. Earnings on investments was the primary piece of that. We came in very strong with our investing. That was due to high interest rates, long-term investment, putting it out for more than 6 months to over a year, with monies that were coming in. So we did really, really well on earnings on investments. As you know, earning on investments go with the market. So that's not something that I will even look at. You'll see in the 25-26 budget and budget what we earned in 23, 24, or even this year, because the market swings depending on a lot of external factors. So anytime that we are over budget on earnings on investment, we're always happy about that, but that's not a consistent revenue stream that I would rely upon. I would use historical trends and market factors to make that budget determination. The other area is local earned income tax. We've been trending about $200,000 on an uptick every year. So Sam and I will take a look at that when we're doing the revenue budget, to try to align that a little bit better. The state, I will always do this. Um, is I use the previous year's allocations. So for 23, 24, I used the 22, 23 allocations that we got from the state subsidies. We knew that after the state budget was approved, that we had about a $500,000 cushion in our budget, when those allocations came through. I like to flatline it in case there's ever a situation where we get decreased, so that we're not taking a heavy hit on what, initially comes out in the governor's budget report versus what actually happens. So that makes up our revenue swing, of the $2 million. On the expense side, our actual, when you look at what our actual spend was, we were over budget by about $1.6 million. I just want to remind the committee and really apprise Sean, and the student representative. When we presented budget, at that time, we had anticipated using about 1.1 million in fund balance. So we knew that there was a gap between what we budgeted for revenues and anticipated and what we budgeted for expenditures. So when you see a lot of those negatives in those areas, it looks a little daunting, like budget's off, but you have to remember that we were already anticipating that we were using 1.1 in fund balance, so that we were going to naturally have gaps anyway. So it's not like it's something new and something that should be alarming. It's something that we knew. When we go through budget and we use fund balance, there's always going to be an offset between revenues and expenses. You're always going to have negatives in your expenses because you're going into the budget year with the use of fund balance and your expenditures being higher, than it actually was. So I just want to highlight a couple of areas outside of what we already knew, was going to be over. Is we had some cost settlements in 23, 24. And one of the things with cost settlements, which is student placements, or student settlements, through special education, um, is with cost settlements, it might be a 4-year cost settlement, and this is something that the board has to approve. They're always approved by the board, so that you're aware of them. With budget wise, you have to recognize the entire cost settlement in the year that the settlement happens. So you could go into a settlement for a student for 4 years at X number of dollars. You have to fully recognize that cost settlement in the year that it is signed and it happens, even though you are not putting the money out in that initial year. So there are cost settlements that we have on the books that once we fully recognize the cost settlement as an expense on our books, the piece that doesn't get paid then goes into a liability, and then we chunk away at the liability. And then in the event at the end of the cost settlement, it's favorable to the district or the student returns or something happens, we then recognize, we credit back on the expenditure side in the year that the cost settlement ends. We just had something similar happen, I think, in this actual audit, or it's this year, where the cost settlement money came back and wasn't used, so we had to credit it back against the expenditure because we overstated expenditures, with the initial cost settlement. So I just wanted to explain that because that's a number that is difficult to budget. So we go based on trend on what we anticipate. We work with our student services director, Meg Dennis, to try to get a handle and understanding of what she thinks is coming in that budgeted year. But at any given year, that can spike. We always assign fund balance for special education for that purpose, because we don't know in any given year what thing will happen. We don't know what student is going to move into the district that might have needs that we can't anticipate not being able to handle. So those are kind of unknown factors. The other one is that we did a furniture replacement in a couple areas in the district, the biggest one being the high school library. We've been focusing on the high school to try to update the furniture, replace the furniture with flexible furniture. We started off with the freeze lobby, where that's a big contributor to the lunch and learn program that's at the high school, because it's flexible seating. It gets a lot of use from teachers outside of their classrooms. So one of the things that we looked at in this fiscal, in the 23-24 year, was upgrading the library. So the bulk of that money for the furniture replacement went into the revamp of our library. So we have about $537,000, which is net based on anticipated use of fund balance on top of the 1.1 million that we had. So our impact on fund balance, which our ending balance is a little over 20 million. We had anticipated use for the 23-24 budget of 1.1. We had additional expenditures identified above that 1.1 of 537, and then the Carson Valley liability. It's a good and a bad, more good, bad for this audit year, for 23-24. But, as you know, Carson Valley no longer is operating. So we are not going to have to deal with the finances and the back and the forth and figuring out processes on how to determine of collections of money and shoring up processes. We did a really, really good job going into the 24-25 year and beyond with our processes shored up, where our liability or the amount of money that we were having to absorb from Philadelphia mostly not paying the full tuition rate. We had those processes shored up, and then we got word that Carson Valley was no longer operating. So unfortunately, this is stuff that we carried on the books. Ron and I went back and forth as far as, when to write it off. And we came to the determination, because Carson Valley is no longer operating, that we just wanted to wipe the books clean in the event that we will recoup any of the money, which we are still trying to do and put in place, with the outstanding, especially from the 23-24 year and the 24-25 year. That will then, if we recoup money, it'll show on the future audits as a special gain. So it'll offset the special loss piece, but we just figured that we would clean slate it so that we didn't keep carrying liabilities about Carson Valley on our books. And so we'd have a true understanding of fund balance if we did write that off.
Kara,
Yes.
what you're mentioning a possibility of recouping, is that like a slim possibility, or do you anticipate some level of recoup?
So one of the things that happened, that we're waiting and we're not getting response from PDE, or Philadelphia is, we had a similar situation that Philadelphia was trying to bill us for, tuition charges for a student that had other placement, that had medical hospitalization placement. We paid for the hospitalization placement, then we got a tuition bill out of the blue. So then when we tried to challenge it, they were like, well, this organization works. That student was recommended and placed there. It was very similar to the Carson Valley situation. So we said, no problem, we'll pay it. And if you agree, then we are going to back bill you for all the Carson Valley stuff. Otherwise, we're paying the tuition rate. Philadelphia had CC'd PDE on the correspondence. So we are trying to get in, because they wanted to hit our subsidy. So that is what we're going to look at, is out of this amount of money, what amount is eligible for us to try to hit their subsidy to recoup some of the items that we believe that they should fully pay for. So we're going to work through PDE. That's not a fast moving process. But there's still an avenue that we might be able to collect some monies from Philadelphia through PDE based on that correspondence that was generated by Philadelphia to us.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I will keep you updated. And again, if there is any money recouped, that is obviously something that I will shout from rooftops when it comes to Carson Valley recouping money. So you guys will be the first to know.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? I mean, I have information if you want to get into a little bit more detail on the specific line items on what variances got thrown on some of the bigger items, I can most definitely talk it through. The two areas that I identified are the two biggest ones that I can really report on that I believe are like one-time impacts. I don't expect cost settlements, and I looked at the cost settlement number for this year, and it's like $17,000. So we're not trending on the same path that we were in 23, 24 at this time with cost settlements.
And you had mentioned that you project the cost settlements into the future based on the trajectories from the past, right?
Yeah, so I work with the director of student services, and then I do look at the trend on what hits our books. So like I said, this is one of those things that when you look at budget, it goes up and down. We like to have a flat line, but these are unpredicted items. You know, like I said, you could have a family move in with a student that has needs.
Mhm.
We go through this process, or you can have anything, you know, with current students within our district that can trigger this. So it is kind of one of those unknown factors. We obviously try to make sure that we mitigate these types of costs. So unfortunately, sometimes our hands are tied. But I do know that Meg Dennis in her office works very, very hard with Dr. Johnston, and you know, they try to mitigate these costs. Unfortunately, looking at the timeline, we're in 23, 24. This is also impacting, this is COVID impact, in my opinion. We're still feeling that, even though COVID's gone, we don't want to use that word anymore. On the financial side, these are the years that we are feeling the impact of COVID. We didn't feel it when COVID actually happened because everything shut down, so there was no money being spent. There was money here and there, but nothing. This is the time where you're seeing increased costs. You're seeing the results of the impact on education with the students themselves on what impact they had because they were virtual during a period of time. So um, I believe that most of this is COVID impact that we're feeling a couple years after COVID actually hit, which was anticipated on the financial end.
Okay.
All right, I have a question, Ms. Green.
Sure.
So the 537,000, is that part of the fund balance, or is that strictly a net operating loss at this point?
So that is additional, it's coming out of fund balance. It's above and beyond what we had anticipated using in fund balance. So when I did budget for 23, 24, the anticipation was to use 1.1 out of fund balance to offset our expenditures being higher than our revenues. That was the offset that we used to balance the budget. Um, in the year with actual spend, we accumulated $537,000 more than anticipated in expenditures. So we are going to have to dip into fund balance, not for the 1.1 that was originally anticipated, but the 1.6.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this? Okay. We're going to go on to the 25, 26 budget update. And I'll be happy when the audit gets wrapped up because like I announced at our administrative meeting, this is the year that Sam and I work in 3 fiscal years. We work in the previous fiscal year, the current fiscal year, and now we're starting on to next year's fiscal year. So we're juggling 3 fiscal years in dealing with those numbers at one time. So it'll be nice to get the audit wrapped up so that we're not talking about 23, 24 anymore. You know, the guiding principles, we talked about this at our last meeting, how we developed the budget and why we developed the budget. So these are the principles that guide us when we're putting budget together. This goes to all the administrators and anybody that does budget so that we know that we're working towards the same goal in mind when we're building our budget. You saw this too. I always like to do repeater slides just because, you know, you guys will be able to talk about it at a drop of a hat because you see it so much. So this is just the history of Act 1 index and our aid ratio and what the district has historically raised taxes benchmarked against the Act 1 index. As you know, Act 1 index for the 25-26 fiscal year is 4%. You will see in the upcoming years, the projections, it is going to start to go down. So over the next 5 years, we're going from 4% to 3.2%. So we have to be cognizant that we know that our ability to levy taxes and raise taxes is going to start to get limited over the next few years. So what is going to drive our budget planning for 25-26? So revenues, it's Act 1 index is 4%, like I said. That generates approximately $2 million based upon our overall assessment within our district. Something that it's our primary source of way to generate additional revenue. As you saw with the audit on how things came in, the big spike was our earning on investment. So that's the wow factor in our budget right now, which that can change at a drop of a hat. So the primary way that we can obtain additional revenue dollars in our budget is through increasing taxes. And and everybody knows that we have a very large residential base. We have a small business base. Um, Earned income taxes, it's showing a minor positive trend of approximately $200,000. So we will most definitely take that into account. And again, like I said, earnings on investments, it's an unknown. So that's not something that we're going to rely upon that we're going to assume we're going to have $1.8 million hitting our budget for the 24-25 or the 25-26 year. On the expenditure side, we have fixed obligations that are already known. The big piece of our budget is salaries and benefits. We're going into year 3 for 25-26 of our teacher's contract. That's going to cost us approximately $1.3 million in new money. That's a 4-year contract, so we still have 2 years on that contract. Debt service, we are going into phase 3 borrowing for the middle school project. That presentation will happen in February. Jamie Doyle and Carly will be doing that presentation. As you know, we're going for another $10 million. They actually requested a draw schedule. They want to make sure, because of the timing of the completion of the project, that we have enough money to get us through the 26-27 school year, because that's when our 4th and final borrowing will happen for that project. So right now we still anticipate that we'll be doing a $10 million borrowing. With a $10 million borrowing, and this is an asterisk there, it's come in lower, but the estimate is about $550,000 gets added to our budget in a given year for a $10 million borrowing. So that gets added to our debt service. We got our first look for medical and prescription rates. Medical is an 11.2% increase. That is where that line item, employees do contribute to that. They contribute between 16 and 16.5% of the medical premium. Our first look rates for prescription came in at 12%. The district fully funds that. That is not included in the premium calculation for employees. First look, I will say, is usually higher than second look. So Emily, Care, and I will be working together to see if what is happening there with those trends and how we can mitigate those increases, so that it doesn't impact our budget, as much as the first look is projecting to do. Fixed obligations that are unknown. We have 3 contracts that are expiring as of June 30th of this year. We have STESPA, which we are currently in talks right now. Dr. Yannicone, Emily, and I, along with STESPA leadership. We have Act 93, which is our administrators and confidential secretaries. So those agreements all expire June 30th. As of right now, those numbers are unknown. We don't know what the final numbers are going to be. But those are obligations that we're going to have to build into budget. The other one is the PEASER employer contribution rate. That does not get certified until December. I'm going to knock on wood and cross a lot of fingers and toes. The last 2 years, we have seen a decrease in that rate. So I hope that it continues with the downward trend, and that number will come in. But those projections are out, so those will be built into budget until we get the certification. On the other side, the other external factors is the economy. The CPI increased 3.2% between February 23 and February 24. That's the benchmark that is always used to determine that number. Right now, what is out there is that inflation is being impacted by the wage pressures of having to hire people at a higher rate. And again, this is an impact of COVID. So as workers bargain for a better pay, firms increase the cost of goods and services to offset those costs that they have to pay their employees. So it's a catch-22 because we want to make sure that we pay our workers a fair wage, but as we do that with in the private industry, goods and services go up. So we'll keep an eye on the economy and see what happens. And that's going to also run with the impact of the election results. So there's a change of administration in January of 2025. That will have an impact on inflation. It'll have an impact on economy. We don't know what that'll look like yet. So we'll keep our eyes on that trend and make sure that we report on that. The other one, because there has been talks and information put out there from the elect administration that is going into office about the future of the Department of Education at the federal level. So I'm going to share some information that we put together. This was thanks to Dr. Lutz and Sam. They put this information together so that we can get in front of and have an idea of what we're looking at and how we're impacted on the federal side. And Dr. Yannicone, please feel free to jump in at any time if you would like to weigh in on this. One of the areas we get funded by the state and the federal government for our food services, the National School Lunch Program. So what we looked at is how much of a federal impact that has on food services. Approximately 45% of our overall food services budget was funded by federal dollars. That's about $480,000. Special education, there's two buckets of money that passes down through the feds coming through the IU, and that is IDA and IDA 619. You can see we get about $627,000 from that program, and we pay the salary and benefits of our some special education teachers out of that. That's how those are funded. And then with the smaller chunk of money, that's our age of beginning services that get billed through the IU to us. So we pay a small portion of our age of beginning services with the IDA 619 funds. So that's another bucket of money that's federal dollars. Special education access funding. Approximately an annual amount is about $41,000 through our cost settlements. We outsource with the IU to track all of our eligible students. There's reporting that gets done every quarter through SAM. And then at the end of the year, there's a cost settlement document that determines how much money we are eligible for and get for access funding based upon the students that are within our district. That money is not used every year. It can be used for specialized things. Our accrual amount, and this is partly because we had ESSER funding that we didn't touch our access funding over those years with the ESSER funds. But this is something that Dr. Dennis and I will work together to look at the needs on what we need to spend this on. But right now, our accrued amount is about $1 million of funding for access funding. What we're using it for, and this past year, we still had the remainder of the ESSER funds, so we didn't use it for this, but it's used for our ESY programming in the summer. So that's how we fully fund our ESY program. So that would be the impact in the event that any funding is lost through access. Our federal program total dollars, these are all of our title funds. So, Title I, Title II, Title IV. We have about $318,000. Those title funds support some professional development, but the bulk of it supports our title teachers, reading specialists. Those funds are attributed towards their salaries and benefits. So you can see the breakdown here. About $300,000 is our Title I reading specialist at Enfield. And then we have to, by law and through the grant funding, we have to provide non-pub funding, about $12,000, and then about $4,200 used for professional development. That's Title I. Title III, we combine with other districts through the IU to utilize combined Title III funding as a consortium. It provides access to Lexia and that's an online language platform. We receive about $3,000 from the consortium, which helps us fund the ELD curriculum intervention purchases. And then other grants, we received a one-time grant from the American Recovery Plan Act. They have to be spent by the end of this school year. That's about $19,000. So our total federal funds with all the items that I talked about, it's about $1.5 million, just under. So they directly support student-centered activities and initiatives. A big piece is the school lunch program and special education salaries, teachers. So that would be the impact, if any, on federal programs or federal funds, if there were some changes at the federal level. Dr. Yannicka?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to make sure, first of all, I wanted to thank Kara, Sam, as well as Michelle Lutz, who've pulled together these funding analysis from the federal level. Over the last week, since the conclusion of the election, there have been some statements made regarding potential changes to the Department of Education at the federal level. And so one of the things that I asked Kara to do over the last week was conduct a thorough analysis of where all of our federal funds are coming from and where they are providing services to students in the district, as well as staffing. And the reason why we're doing that is because there may or may not come a point in which next year or the year following, these funding streams are altered or eliminated. In addition to that, there may be a point at which the board needs to make a decision about whether or not to follow particular directives from the federal government in regards to elimination of some programming or historical protections for some groups of students, or modifications to curriculum. And so we wanted to have an accounting of this so that as we're thoughtfully trying to begin to prepare for next year's budget and future budgets, we can start to think about how we could absorb some or all of these expenditures if necessary. So that may be a more extreme view of our budget planning, but given some of the recent statements, we wanted to be as prepared as possible. And so we'll continue to monitor this information. I've also put in a request to our Pennsylvania Department of Education through the intermediate unit yesterday to please get an accounting of what the state of Pennsylvania Department of Education may be thinking about with regard to revenue streams and expenditures as we move forward. In addition to that, with regard to the overall use of fund balance this year, as we looked at the 23-24 school year, Kara did mention some of this is absolutely the outgrowth of COVID, in part because of the increased needs for student services over the last 4 years, since COVID really hit districts hard. And some of the things I'll mention that were alluded to or specifically mentioned by Kara, we have had a significant increase in special education expenditures. We've added 4 special ed positions across the district since the initiation of COVID. And this year we had to add an additional 2 positions at the elementary level in emotional support. We've also seen an increase in the number of instructional aides who've been needed in order to provide support for students who had either a social and emotional or academic impact as a result of lost instructional time during COVID. And that's the case nationally, regionally and locally. We're not unique in that, but we have had an increase in staffing expenditures. And so while we're not happy about dipping into fund balance, and certainly are planning to see what adjustments we can make to avoid that moving forward, we do know that there's going to be a decreasing ability to levy taxes through the Act 1 index. And so we are working really hard and began with our administrative team this week to start to look at ways that we can modify our expenditures moving forward, still offering a quality education, but spreading out any major capital projects and working really diligently to make sure that we can bring the board an affordable budget for the community while maintaining all of those guiding principles. So I'm happy to answer any questions about either of these items, but we did think at this point it was important to highlight both the federal funding and sort of where we are with regard to the use of fund balance. And again, please ask any questions you like, or if you have any thoughts, we're happy to hear them.
You actually answered all the questions I had coming into this by presenting these slides, so I really appreciate the predicting ahead of time what the questions were going to be. But these were very helpful to put things in perspective, and sort of a worst case, hopefully worst case scenario of what might be coming down the pike.
Thank you. I agree. We hope it's worst case. Mr. Jordan, is there anything that we can answer for you?
No, not at this time. As we know, with the change in administration, we anticipate change in policies and funding. So, thank you for the presentation. Greatly appreciate it.
So I guess I do actually have one other question, and this is not about the administration change, but just the projections that are utilized each year about our anticipated increase or decrease in students. Do they take into account? I mean, I know there are a number of developments in discussion within the township. There's one recently that came up that might take place in Winmore, and I just wanted to check in and see if that type of thing is considered in our projections of increases of the student body.
Are you thinking specifically about some of the construction of townhomes and?
Well, there's the townhomes that are already under construction, and then I've been seeing something, I guess somebody presented another development that would increase, there's like an over 55 community, and then some other townhouses that might go in where the fire station is in Winmore. It sounds like it's early, but if they're talking about things like that, I just want to see if we're talking about them over on our end as well.
Or speak to that.
Yeah, sure. So we most definitely do. So when I first got here, we did an enrollment study with the county, with the planning commission. They gathered all the information. One of the big components there was working with the township to understand what future developments were going to happen that could impact enrollment. So that information was peeled in. So the recent constructions, maybe not this one particularly, but the ones that have happened over the span of since I've been here, and when that the enrollment projection was done, that information was taken into account and enrollment numbers were adjusted accordingly based upon those future projects. We have paid attention to the enrollment projections, and we have stayed right on course. It has not been a big swing that we've seen, that we've been out of balance with what the document showed us. So we feel very comfortable in using those enrollment projection numbers because we've paid attention the last couple of years, and they've been really, really on target. Another thing that happens is twofold. During the budget process, I do converse with the township to find out if there's any projects that would impact enrollment. So I do take that into account. The other piece is, since we've been doing a borrowing the last couple years, if we do not have a updated S&P rating, rating sheet done, I have to go through our S&P rating call. That is part of the questions that happen during that call, is what development is happening within your township that could impact enrollment. So over the last couple of years, I've had to stay abreast of that information and utilize that for not only budget purposes, but also for our rating purposes, to continue our, our A+- rating. So long answer to your short question is yes.
Great. I don't like to assume, so thank you.
No problem. Okay, and I just have one other slide, and this is one, again, it's a repeater, and we'll continue this. I have updated this slide since the last meeting. We've made some adjustments to future finance committee meetings. So please pay attention to that. And if for any reason you can't attend or something is happening, these are when we have these scheduled. We can always be flexible. As you know, though, we are leaving a gap in our meeting. So we have one more meeting in June after the June 3rd meeting where we're going to approve our final budget. And that's just for me, a placeholder. Last year, we had we had to redo a resolution and revise a resolution based upon our homestead numbers. And we didn't have we went to the last meeting. So this is going to give me wiggle room just in case any of those things happen so that we can ensure that we have the proper approvals from the board for all budget areas. But what that does is that does push up our timeline on getting the budget approved by a whole board meeting. So March 7th is going to be, let me not skip the 14th because it's February 14th. So happy Valentine's Day, everybody, with the Finance Committee meeting. But that is going to be where Jamie Doyle does talk about our next borrowing. We'll have just an update if anything is happening as far as that I can report on with budget. We'll have some certifications done, so I'll know some more information on known factors and how that will impact budget. And then March 7th is our big look. That's the first look at the 25-26 budget. So that's the big meeting where we'll get the first glimpse of us putting budget together. So we're working with administration right now to start that budget process. I will be having meetings before Thanksgiving with all of them to have that conversation. Dr. Yannicone set the tone at our last administrative council meeting with all the information that we presented to the Finance Committee today. So they are well aware of the economic climate, the political climate, our current climate at the local level with our negotiations on how that all impacts budget and where everybody should be thinking moving forward. But March 7th is going to be our first look at budget. And then from there, those dates are just, we are required by PDE to have certain days in between approvals. So I just kind of work backwards and those are the dates that we have. But it does leave us with an extra board meeting if we need to be flexible. Any questions on that?
None for me at this time. Thank you.
Not
Okay.
for me either.
Okay, so what's coming out of this meeting is that we are going to put the budget opt-out resolution, that'll be under finance, for approval from the full board. As you know, that is to certify that we will not increase property taxes above the Act 1 index of 4%. So it'll be a resolution that gets passed, that'll start our budget, that kicks off our budget for 25-26 as far as official approvals for PDE. So then moving forward, what we'll do is we will build a budget where we are not raising taxes above 4%. The other item that you'll see, this didn't need to go through finance, it's an annual approval, is the Eastern budget is up for approval by the board as well. So those are the two finance items that will be coming out. And then at the December 3rd meeting, which starts off with the reorg meeting, and then we'll have our normal interim meeting, the final audit will be up for approval at that meeting. So in between now and then, Sam and I will work to shore up the MD&A. Those are just, like I said, those are just ticking, checking the boxes to make sure that we have all the components of the audit. Do not anticipate any material changes to the numbers that the Finance Committee saw today. In the event that does happen, we will most definitely bring it back. We won't surprise you with a big, huge change when you see that number on the board to be approved. It'll be well communicated.
Great, sounds good.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
no problem. If there are no other questions, Sanaya, is that right? Did I get that right?
Yes, Sanaya, yes.
All right. Do you have any questions? That was a lot of numbers and not the most stimulating presentations that we have for the Finance Committee. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. You could, and if you don't think of them now and you think of them later, you can most definitely reach out to Dr. Yannicone and she'll shuffle them down to me so that you can have answers for anything that you might need answers to.
I think I'm okay for right now, but thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, thanks again for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have students listen in and to hear the budget process. We're going to get into the budget building, so I think that's a fun process for me anyway. So it's always interesting to see what goes into the behind the scenes on how things are funded and how decisions are made on what happens within the schools. So stay tuned. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll adjourn the meeting if there's no other questions. And everybody have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
Have
much.
a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.